so you've just shot some S-Log3 footage, you've dropped it into Premiere Pro, only to find that it's flat, it's bland and gray like your childhood oatmeal, and not at all what you saw in camera. Well, in today's video, we're gonna go step by step and walk you through exactly how to fix that and how to take your footage from this to this. At its core, S-Log footage is a flat picture profile that maximizes the dynamic range of your sensor. This allows you the most flexibility to color your footage exactly the way that you want. Let's walk through a couple of examples of color grading some of this footage. Let's hop into it. All right, so now that we're in the editing room, the first thing that I do when I launch a project is I try to make sure that my auto detect log footage feature is turned on. So what does the feature do? It allows Premiere Pro to auto convert your log footage into the correct color space. So if we go to File, Project Settings, and Color, we will see here that we have an option to auto detect log video color space. So here's what that looks like when it gets turned on. And boom, footage is immediately colored to a standard picture profile. So what happens if you click that button and you hit OK and the footage does not convert? Well, that means that we will have to do a manual conversion. It probably means that Adobe was unable to identify your log footage, and so that means you will have to convert that manually. So I'm gonna go ahead and show you how to do that now. So we're gonna turn off auto detect log footage, and depending on your camera manufacturer, when it comes to converting your footage, most manufacturers actually already provide a free conversion LUT that you can import into your project that will allow you to immediately begin working on your color grades. So what I'm gonna go ahead and do here is I'm going to right click. I am going to click on New Item, Adjustment Layer, make sure that it's my proper settings. And we're gonna take that and we're gonna drag it on top of the footage here. And we're gonna extend that to the length of the clip that we have. Next thing we're gonna do, we're gonna make sure we select the adjustment layer. We're gonna go to our basic correction tab in the Lumetri colors. And here we're gonna click on the input LUT. We are going to browse. And you can see here, I have the Sony look profiles for S-Log3, which is what we're working with. And we're gonna go ahead and grab the very first cube and apply that to our footage. So now you can see the footage is now converted to a Rec 709 profile. So once we do that, this gives us the starting point to achieving the exact look that we want for our film. So what are some of the first things that I would do once I convert the footage? Well, first thing I like to do is I like to go to the curves tab and I like to add a little bit extra into the shadows and a little bit to the highlights. You can see that contrast pop right off the screen. This gives us a little bit of that HDR effect. So we do the before and after, boom. And from there, I tend to go to the basic correction tab where I will shape the image, color correct it if needed, and then I'll apply some of the creative settings that will help make the image even better. So first thing I could probably do here is maybe bump this up ever so slightly on the exposure. I can add a smidge more to the contrast. We're gonna go 15 points on this one. I'm gonna pull the highlights back about 10 points. Well, we see what happens if we hit 100. So we're gonna pull it back about 10 points. We're gonna bump up the shadows 10 points. And we're gonna pull the whites down 10 points. This is usually where I start for some of my grades, and to have a little bit more contrast, I'm actually gonna pull the blacks down just a little bit more to a -5. Is that too much? No, it looks good. And of course, all of this is preference. You can see the difference. If I turn off the basic corrections I've done, it turns off the LUT. So we've kind of gone from this flat profile now to having this nice punchy contrasted image. Next part that I like to go into is the creative tab. And here I'm gonna add about 25 points to vibrance and maybe take the saturation to 110. I still like the way that looks. And of course you can always mess with some of these other settings. If you want kind of a faded film look, it kind of makes it more of a matte finish, which also looks really good as well. But for the sake of this tutorial, I'm gonna leave that set to 0. And next up, I am gonna go to the curves section. And just a quick breakdown, if you're messing with log footage, you have a lot more flexibility because of the profile that you're working in. So the first option that we have here is called hue versus sat. And basically what this allows you to do is take a specific color and then you can enhance the saturation or de-hance the saturation, right? So for instance, we have this Bobcat logo here. I am gonna grab the color dropper tool and I'm gonna click on the red portion of this logo. And you can see that that auto selects that color space in the hue versus sat box. And if I pull this down, it'll pull reds out of the image. You can see how that affects the sash and the logo. It also affects some of the skin tones. A lot of skin tones have red in them. And if I enhance this, you can see that it starts to add way more life and color to the image by boosting those reds. Of course, if you take it too far, you'll start to break the footage. So we can take this, we could probably enhance this just a smidge, just like that, looks good. The second box that we have here is called hue versus hue. And that allows you to take a color and adjust that color to a specific tint. So for instance, we can take that same example. We'll grab the color dropper tool here. We'll click on this red logo and you can see that it auto creates that same color space right there. And I can take this middle point, and if I pull this point down, you can immediately see that it takes the red and starts to make it green. And you can see how that dramatically affects the image. If I go the other way, you can see that it starts to make it more blue. And you can see how that transforms the maroon into a purple tone. And because our subject here also has red on their lips, it also makes their lips more pink and purple. So we probably don't want to mess with that color. I really like the way this maroon looks. It's true to life, so we're going to keep that there. But in this case, you could take a color space like the greens, and you could modify the greens to be different colors, and you can see how that dramatically changes the image. It makes some of those trees look like fall. If we go upwards, you see the trees start to turn reddish orange. If we go the other way, it makes the trees a lot more of a cooler tone. So the trees start to look blue-green, and that actually does look really cool. Depends on your preference of style. You could mess with those tones. Kind of like this right up here. So we can kind of do that. And then we have our third box here. And this third box will come in handy in a lot of different situations. And this is hue versus luma. And what that allows us to do is it allows us to select a specific color and choose, and it allows us to select a specific color and either increase brightness or decrease brightness of that color. So for instance, we'll use the same example of the red color here. We'll do the eyedropper and select that red color. And now if I pull down, you can actually see all of the red tones in this image start to become darker. So it pulls some of those highlights out of those reds. And if you see, if I go too far, you see it starts to break the image. And if I go the other way, well, you see that it starts to make all the reds in the image much brighter, and you can see how that affects the image when I sway left to right. And that's where you have to be very careful. It's a very sensitive tool. So in this case, because the maroon sash has some glare on it, we will actually pull this down just a few points, and you can see the before and after, how now the maroon sash looks evenly exposed. It also kind of looks like I might have pulled it too much, so we're going to bring this back up just a little bit, and it just pulls a little bit of that edge off, and we can make this fit once more. So hit fit. And so now we have an image that has been properly corrected. So if I do the before and after, so actually let me make sure this is set to fit. And if I hit the FX button here, you can see the before, and now you can see the after. A dramatic difference from what we started with. We were able to push and pull the image in different parts that allowed us to achieve the best image possible without breaking any of the colors. Now, if you want to take this a step further, we can go into our creative tab and we can further stylize the image even more. And while there are other options here, such as the color wheels and match, I don't tend to use this too much. It's very similar to the creative tab. I'd say it's way more sensitive. It's all about personal preference here. You can see that if I do this here, we can make the shadows more blue, and we can take the highlights and make them more red-orange. And if I show you the before and after, you can see that it adjusts the tones of our image here. It makes it a little bit more filmic. And this part of the editing process will really come down to the look that you're trying to achieve. If you want it to be more sad or more solemn, you might want to add more of the blue tones to it. If you want it to feel more warm and alive, you'll probably push towards the red tone. So if I push the shadows more towards the red, you can see that the dark parts of our image begin to take a different shape, and you can see how that affects our image. Very, very subtle, but that could be all the difference to achieving the look that you want to go for. So I'm going to reset this here. We can just double click and it resets any of these settings, and I can go back here and it's basically the exact same thing if I mess with these settings here in the color wheels here. And even right there, that looks really nice too. We could try that, and you can see how that impacts the colors of the image dramatically. And let's see if we kind of take the highlights, we can kind of mess around right here, and you see how that starts to impact the highlights of the skin and the highlights of the image. But I probably wouldn't mess with this too much. This is a perfectly exposed shot that was very easy to work with, and just from starting at our base level of achieving the conversion, we're able to have a very, very, very nice image. So if I play a little bit of this image, a little bit of this here, you see it looks really, really, really good. This was shot at 60 frames per second, so it looks a little different on the timeline than in the final film. What a huge transformation here. So that is our first example, right? We're actually going to be looking at a underexposed clip, which might happen from time to time if you find yourself in a run and gun situation and for some reason weren't able to dial in your exposure. We're going to look at what happens with this particular log footage. So you can see here, it's already been auto detected. So I am going to show you what it looks like without the auto detection. So we're going to turn that off. Hit OK. So here is that image. It is, I would say, very underexposed by probably 2 stops of light. So we are gonna go ahead and grab our adjustment layer and drag it on top of that clip. We're gonna drag it all the way across that image there. And again, we could do one of 2 methods. We can do the conversion LUT method or the auto detect. So in this case, I will go ahead and grab the conversion cube from Sony, and you can see that when it converts that, it is a dramatically underexposed image. Holy cow, that is very underexposed. The first thing we'd probably want to do is go straight to our color corrections, and actually I put it on the wrong one. So I'm going to grab here, input LUT, browse, there, make sure it's on the adjustment layer. It probably is fine if you do it on the main footage itself. It comes down to preference of style, but for the main creative styling, you're going to want to do that on the adjustment layer. So let us continue. So first thing we want to do is, of course, be able to see our subject. So we are going to increase the exposure, and here's about those 2 points. It's still pretty underexposed, so let's go to 3, 4 points. So that was a super underexposed image. So far, the image is holding together. You can see a little bit of grain, a little bit of noise from us boosting it so much in exposure. Next thing we'll probably want to do is increase the contrast just a little bit. And the amount of corrections you're going to do will largely depend on how much of the exposure you're pushing. So if you're having to really up the exposure for your image, you're probably not going to have a lot of flexibility with some of the other options because you're already really enhancing the image brightness. So a lot of these other settings will likely become very sensitive. So we don't want to push it too hard. We want to try and find a nice, happy balance. Let's pull some of the highlights, which will pull it from this TV that you see here. So you can see if I pull the highlights a lot, it affects the skin tones of our subject and also affects the brightness of the TV. So we're going to reset this. Maybe bring that down a couple points. Since our subject is in the shadows, we can probably bump this up a little bit depending on your personal style. Maybe you like this darker look, you can do that. In this case, we want to find a middle ground of exposure. So we're going to pull that. Now we're going to go to minus 20 on the whites, which will help pull it more brightness out of the TV. We don't really need to mess with the black settings very much. It's more for that matte look, or if you really want to have a contrasted image. Comes down to personal preference. Here, it'd be up to you whether you want to add a tone curve. You could make this more moody by adding an S curve like we did in our previous edits, or if you don't want to increase those highlights, you can just do the bottom part of the S. And you can see here how that changes the image, which would all comes down to personal preference. So here we go. Let's say I want to enhance the color of the subject's skin. I will come here to view hue versus luma, which allows us to enhance the color or the brightness of a particular color. So we'll do this. Let's enhance the brightness of the skin a little bit, and we can see how we can mess with that. But you can see we don't have a lot of room to work with here. So this might not be a viable option for this particular edit. And that's largely just because the image was very underexposed. So by the time we converted it, the image is already very tough to see the subject. But if we turn this off, you can see how much we were able to save the image. So that was before and after. And if I turn off the basic corrections, you can definitely see how much of a shift we have made to this footage here. So we did our basic correction, and then now we can go to the creative tab. If we want to enhance colors some more, we can boost those colors. We can go up 20 points here. What happens if we push this? Nope, we don't have a lot of playroom here. So I'm going to keep that. I might bring this back down. If you want that faded film look, you could do that. That actually looks really cool with the faded film look. Go like 20 points. And that keeps it kind of that cinematic look. Looks very good. Curves, I think we're good here. There's not really a lot that we want to mess with, but let's say you wanted to change the blue color of this portion of the TV. You can grab your hue versus hue, grab the color dropper, and boom, selects that color for you. And now we can adjust the tones of that portion of the TV, and you can push that to be very cool and unique stylings. You've probably seen this happen in other projects or in the final products of other films. And you can see how we can really enhance different parts of the image. And of course, this affects that color across the entire image. So we changed that there. You can see very subtle for the purposes of this tutorial. So that's a quick rundown of color grading some log footage. These are very basic changes that we made to the picture, but this allows us, this is the entry point to being able to achieve the exact look that you want. For instance, in the creative tab is where you'll be able to find a lot of those accents and really define how you want your image to look. So if we add some green to the shadows here, and then we go to the opposite spectrum and maybe add some pinks to the highlights, you can see that we can achieve a much different look, subtle, but different. And those are the things that will make all of the difference. Now, we'll be having some more advanced tutorials in the future on really pushing the landscape of this type of color grading. All right, so now that we've gone through those 3 examples, it's time for us to look at the full before and afters of each clip. So check it out. So now that we've taken a look at the graded and ungraded footage, you can see that there's a huge difference between the 2 images. You would definitely not want to send your client the log only type footage. It'd be very difficult for them to fully appreciate everything that was captured that day. So that is why it's important to know how to convert your footage from log to a standard picture profile or Rec. 709. And that's why it's important to know the basics in the editing room of at least going into the basic corrections tab, your creative tab, and the curves tab. Those are the big three that I use most often to really shape the image to exactly what I want. And there'll be a lot of situations where the lighting is not ideal. There might be cheap lights in the room that affect the color of your subject's skin tone. And these are the tools that you will use to shape that footage. So we have now covered exactly what you need to do to get that exact image that you want from your footage. So if you got some value from this video, be sure to like and subscribe. Let us know in the comments what you would like for us to cover next, and we will see you in the next one. Peace.